She thought she destroyed me. Watching my career fall apart while I carried my unborn child, she probably felt untouchable. But karma doesn't need your permission to strike back. This is how her jealousy became her prison end. Justice did. The rest. Judith Martinez stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office on the 28th floor, watching the city sprawl beneath her like a circuit board come to life. At 34, she was everything that success stories were made of: brilliant, beautiful, and relentlessly ambitious. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman who had mastered the art of having it all: cascading auburn hair that caught the light just so, emerald eyes that sparkled with intelligence, and a smile that could disarm the most hardened tech executive. The walls of her office were adorned with awards: Innovator of the Year, Tech Visionary Under 35, Outstanding Achievement in AI Development. Each plaque represented countless nights of coding, debugging, and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Judith had single-handedly revolutionized the company's machine learning algorithms, increasing efficiency by 300% and securing contracts worth millions. But it wasn't just her professional achievements that made heads turn. Judith possessed an almost ethereal beauty that seemed to illuminate every room she entered. Her colleagues, both male and female, would pause mid-conversation when she walked by. The men admired her with barely concealed longing, while the women watched her with something altogether different. Another late night, she turned to find her supervisor, Alina Kozlov, standing in the doorway. Alina was a woman in her early 40s, with sharp Slavic features and ice-blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail, every flaw, every advantage that others possessed. Her blonde hair was always pulled back in a severe bun, and her designer suits were chosen more for intimidation than style. "Just reviewing the quarterly projections," Judith replied, her voice warm despite the late hour. "The new neural network implementation is exceeding all expectations." Elena stepped into the office, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "Like a countdown timer?" "Yes, I've seen the numbers." "Impressive work, as always." The words should have been a compliment, but they carried an undertone that made Judith's skin crawl. There was something in Elena's gaze, a mixture of admiration and resentment, that had been growing stronger over the past year. "Thank you," Judith said simply, beginning to pack up her things. "I should head home. David's cooking tonight, and I promised I'd be there for dinner." At the mention of her husband, Judith's entire demeanor softened. David Chen was everything she could have asked for in a partner: kind, supportive, and secure enough in his own success as a surgeon to celebrate her achievements without feeling diminished. They had been married for 2 years, and their relationship was the kind that made other couples simultaneously envious and hopeful. "How lovely," Alina said, her voice tight. "Some people really do have it all, don't they?" Judith paused, something in her supervisor's tone setting off alarm bells, but when she looked up, Alina was already walking away, her silhouette disappearing into the maze of cubicles beyond. 3 weeks later, Judith stood in the same spot by the window, but this time, she wasn't alone. David's arms were wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I can't believe it," he whispered against her ear. "We're going to be parents." The pregnancy test had been positive that morning, and the confirmation from her doctor that afternoon had sent them both into a state of euphoric disbelief. At 34, Judith had been worried about waiting too long, but now, with her career at its peak and her marriage stronger than ever, the timing felt perfect. "I know," she breathed, placing her hands over his. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out it was all a dream." They had spent the evening planning, talking about nursery colors, debating names, and imagining their future child's first words. David was convinced it would be Mama, while Judith insisted it would be something computer-related. The joy was intoxicating, a warmth that seemed to fill every corner of their lives. The next morning, Judith arrived at work with a glow that was impossible to hide. She had decided to wait until after the first trimester to make any official announcements, but the secret felt too big, too wonderful to contain completely. "You're practically glowing," her colleague Marcus commented as they grabbed coffee in the break room. "What's got you in such a good mood?" Judith just smiled mysteriously. "Life is good, Marcus. Sometimes that's enough." But her good mood was short-lived. Alina appeared in her office doorway before lunch, her expression unreadable. "Judith, do you have a moment? I'd like to discuss your current projects." Something in her tone made Judith's stomach tighten, but she nodded and gestured to the chair across from her desk. Alina closed the door behind her. Never a good sign. I've been reviewing your workload, Alina began, settling into her chair, with the precision of a chess player positioning for checkmate, and I'm concerned that you might be taking on too much. Judith frowned. I'm not sure I understand. My performance reviews have been exceptional, and I'm ahead of schedule on every project. That's precisely the problem, Alina said, her voice taking on a patronizing tone. You're setting unrealistic expectations, both for yourself and for the team. It's not sustainable. With respect, Alina, I've been maintaining this pace for 3 years. I know my limits. Alina's smile was cold. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're headed for burnout. And when that happens, it won't just affect you, it'll affect the entire department. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Alina systematically dismantling every project Judith had worked on, questioning her methods, her timelines, and her judgment. It was death by 1,000 cuts, each criticism small enough to seem reasonable but collectively devastating. When Alina finally left, Judith sat in stunned silence. In all her years at the company, she had never received feedback like this. Her work was solid, more than solid. It was revolutionary. So why did she suddenly feel like she was drowning? The harassment began subtly, like a cancer that spreads undetected until it's too late to stop. Alina started questioning Judith's decisions in meetings, undermining her authority in front of clients, and forgetting to include her in important discussions. I'm sorry, Judith, Alina would say with false concern. I didn't realize you were still working on the Morrison account. I've already assigned it to Derek, but I've been developing that proposal for 3 months. Judith would protest, only to be met with a dismissive wave. I'm sure Derek can incorporate your initial work. We need fresh eyes on this project. The worst part was how reasonable Alina made it all sound. Every slight, every insult, every act of sabotage was wrapped in corporate speak and delivered with a smile. To anyone watching, it would seem like normal workplace dynamics: a supervisor making tough decisions, reallocating resources, managing her team. But Judith knew better. She could see the satisfaction in Alina's eyes when she delivered each blow, the way her supervisor's gaze lingered on her face, searching for cracks in her composure. The stress began to take its toll. Judith found herself working longer hours, trying to prove that she was still valuable, still worthy of her position. She stopped taking lunch breaks, stopped socializing with her colleagues, stopped doing anything that might give Alina ammunition to use against her. At home, David noticed the change immediately. You're exhausted, he said one evening, watching her pick at her dinner. When was the last time you took a real break? I can't, Judith replied, her voice strained. Things are complicated at work right now. Complicated how? She wanted to tell him everything about Alina's campaign of psychological warfare, about the constant second-guessing, about the way her confidence was being systematically demolished. But how could she explain it without sounding paranoid? How could she make him understand that she was being destroyed by 1,000 tiny cuts? It's just politics, she said finally. It'll pass. But it didn't pass. If anything, it got worse. Alina began scheduling important meetings during Judith's doctor's appointments, then expressing disappointment when she missed them. She started assigning Judith to projects with impossible deadlines, then citing her inability to manage time effectively when she struggled to meet them. The pregnancy should have been a source of joy, but instead, it became another weapon in Alina's arsenal. Every time Judith felt nauseous, every time she needed to step out for a moment of fresh air, Alina was there with a concerned expression and a cutting comment. I hope you're not letting your condition affect your work, she would say, her eyes cold despite her sympathetic tone. Judith began to dread coming to work. The office that had once felt like a second home now felt like a prison, and Alina was the warden, watching her every move, waiting for her to slip up. The end came on a Tuesday morning in October. Judith was 12 weeks pregnant, just beginning to show, and she had finally decided to make her announcement official. She had planned to tell Alina first, as a professional courtesy, but her supervisor beat her to the punch. Judith, I need to see you in my office immediately. Alina's voice came through the intercom, sharp and commanding. Judith's stomach dropped. She had been dreading this moment for weeks, sensing that something big was coming. Alina had been too quiet lately, too satisfied, like a cat that had finally cornered its prey. When Judith entered Alina's office, She found her supervisor seated behind her desk with a thick folder in front of her. The blinds were drawn, casting the room in shadows that seemed to swallow the light. "Sit down," Elena commanded, not bothering with pleasantries. Judith took the chair across from her, her hands unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. "What's this about?" Elena opened the folder with deliberate care, revealing a stack of documents. "It's about your performance, Judith, or rather, your lack thereof." "I don't understand." Your last review was based on outdated metrics," Elena interrupted. "We've been conducting a more thorough analysis of your recent work, and the results are ... concerning." She began pulling out papers, each one a damning indictment of Judith's supposed failures. Missing deadlines that Judith had never been informed of, budget overruns on projects she had never approved, client complaints that she had never heard about. "This is impossible," Judith said, her voice rising with panic. "I've never seen these reports before, these deadlines. I was never told about them. I have email records showing that you were informed of every single one of these issues," Elena replied coolly. "Your failure to respond or take corrective action has put the entire department at risk." Judith felt like she was drowning. Every document was a lie, every accusation a carefully crafted fiction, but they were all presented with such clinical precision that they almost seemed real. "I want to see those emails," she demanded. "Of course." Elena turned her computer screen toward Judith, and there they were, messages from Elena's account to her own discussing deadlines, budget concerns, and client issues, but Judith had never seen any of them before. "These are fake," she whispered, but even as she said it, she knew how crazy it sounded. "I understand you're upset," Elena said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "But we need to face facts. Your performance has been declining for months, and now, with your personal situation, I think it's best if we part ways." "You can't fire me for being pregnant," Judith said, her voice stronger now. "It's illegal." "I'm not firing you for being pregnant," Elena replied, her smile sharp as a blade. "I'm terminating your employment due to poor performance and failure to meet professional standards. The pregnancy is merely ... unfortunate timing." The meeting lasted another hour, with Judith fighting for her professional life, while Elena systematically destroyed every argument she made. The fabricated evidence was too comprehensive, too detailed to refute without a lengthy investigation that the company would never authorize. In the end, Judith was given a choice: resign quietly with a reference letter, or be terminated for cause, and face the possibility of legal action for the damages her poor performance had allegedly caused. With a baby on the way and her reputation in tatters, Judith chose resignation. She signed the papers with trembling hands, feeling like she was signing her own death warrant. The months that followed were the darkest of Judith's life. The sudden loss of her career, combined with the hormonal changes of pregnancy, sent her into a spiral of depression that she couldn't seem to escape. David tried to be supportive, but he was struggling too. His surgical practice was successful, but they had been counting on both incomes to support their growing family. More than that, he watched helplessly as his vibrant, confident wife became a shadow of herself. "I can't understand how this happened," Judith would say, staring at the wall of their bedroom for hours at a time. "I was good at my job. I was more than good, I was exceptional." "You were," David would reply, holding her close. "This wasn't about your performance. This was about something else entirely." But Judith couldn't see past her own perceived failures. She blamed herself for not seeing the signs, for not fighting harder, for not being strong enough to withstand Elena's campaign of psychological warfare. The baby was born on a cold February morning, a beautiful, healthy girl they named Sophia. For a few precious moments, holding her daughter in her arms, Judith felt like herself again, but the joy was tinged with sadness, knowing that her dreams of being a working mother, of showing her daughter that women could have it all, had been shattered. "She's perfect," David whispered, tears streaming down his face as he looked at their daughter. "She is," Judith agreed, but her voice was hollow. I wish I could give her more." Meanwhile, across the city, Elena Kozlov was discovering that karma had a way of evening the score. Her victory over Judith had been sweet, but it had also been her last. The European regional director position she had been promised, the culmination of years of political maneuvering and ruthless ambition, was finally within reach. She had cleared away every obstacle, eliminated every threat, and positioned herself as the obvious choice. That's when she met Viktor Petrov at a company networking event. He was handsome in a dangerous way, with dark hair and darker eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed facade. He was also, according to his business card, a successful entrepreneur with interests in Eastern European markets. Elena Kozlov, he said, pronouncing her name with a slight accent that made her stomach flutter. I've heard remarkable things about your work. She was flattered by his attention, seduced by his charm, and completely blind to the trap he was setting. Victor pursued her with the intensity of a man possessed, showering her with expensive gifts and exotic trips, making her feel like the most desirable woman in the world. For the first time in her life, Elena felt like she had won the ultimate prize, not just professional success, but the love of a man who seemed to value her above all else. When he whispered promises of marriage, of a future together, she believed every word. The affair lasted 6 months. 6 months of stolen weekends, secret rendezvous, and the kind of passion that Elena had never experienced before. She began to let her guard down, to imagine a life beyond the corporate battlefield she had spent so long fighting. Then Victor disappeared. One day he was there, planning their weekend getaway to Prague, and the next he was gone. His phone went straight to voicemail. His apartment was suddenly empty, and his business associates had never heard of him. It was as if he had simply evaporated into thin air. Elena might have chalked it up to a bad romance, a lesson learned about trusting too quickly, if not for the morning sickness that began 2 weeks later. The pregnancy test was positive. At 42, unmarried, and with no way to contact the father, Elena found herself facing the same situation she had used to torment Judith, but without the security of a loving marriage or a supportive partner. Her first instinct was to terminate the pregnancy, but by the time she made the decision, it was too late. The laws in her state required multiple consultations, waiting periods, and she had wasted precious time hoping that Victor would return, that he would somehow make everything right. The irony wasn't lost on Elena. As her pregnancy progressed, she found herself experiencing everything she had put Judith through: the exhaustion, the morning sickness, the way her superiors began to look at her differently. But unlike Judith, Elena had no one to blame but herself. She had climbed the corporate ladder by stepping on others, and now she was discovering that the view from the top was lonelier than she had ever imagined. The European director position went to someone else, a younger man with fewer qualifications, but also fewer complications. The official reason was organizational restructuring, but Elena knew the truth. A pregnant woman, especially an unmarried one, didn't fit the image the company wanted to project in their European expansion. Her own position became increasingly precarious. The same executives who had once courted her favor now viewed her as a liability. Her pregnancy was an inconvenience, a complication they hadn't planned for. We're going to need to reassign some of your responsibilities, her supervisor informed her during a meeting that felt eerily familiar. Just until after the baby comes. Of course, Elena wanted to fight, to use the same ruthless tactics that had served her so well in the past. But she was too tired, too broken by the magnitude of her situation. The woman who had once destroyed careers with a smile now found herself on the receiving end of the same treatment. That she was demoted to a junior management position, her salary cut by 40%, her office moved to a smaller space on a lower floor. The fall from grace was swift and brutal, and she experienced every humiliation she had inflicted on others. Months passed, and Elena gave birth to a son she named Mikhail. Unlike Judith's joyful delivery, Elena's was lonely and frightening. She held her baby in the hospital bed, surrounded by flowers from colleagues who pitied her more than they cared about her, and finally understood the weight of what she had done. Judith's face haunted her dreams, the woman she had destroyed for no reason other than jealousy and insecurity. The brilliant engineer whose only crime had been being everything that Elena wished she could be: successful and genuinely happy. Elena had convinced herself that she was evening the playing field, that Judith's success had somehow come at her expense. But now, holding her own child and facing an uncertain future, she realized that she had been the architect of her own destruction. She tried to reach out to Judith once, drafted a letter of apology, even looked up her home address. But what could she say? How could she explain that she had destroyed another woman's life simply because she couldn't bear to see her succeed? The letter remained unwritten, the apology never sent. 2 years later, Judith stood in the lobby of a gleaming new office building, her daughter, Sophia, balanced on her hip. At 3 years old, Sophia was the perfect combination of her parents David's gentle nature and Judith's fierce intelligence. "Mama work?" Sophia asked, pointing at the directory board with its list of companies. "Yes, sweetheart," Judith replied, adjusting her blazer with her free hand. "Mama's going to work." After months of therapy and soul-searching, Judith had finally found the strength to rebuild her career. A small tech startup had offered her a position as their chief technology officer, and though the salary was lower than what she had made before, the opportunity to create something new, something meaningful, was worth more than money. The company was developing assistive technologies for people with disabilities, and Judith's expertise in machine learning was exactly what they needed. For the first time in years, she felt like she was doing work that mattered. As she walked toward the elevator, she caught sight of a familiar figure in the cafe across the street. Elena Kozlov sat alone at a corner table, her laptop open in front of her, looking older and more worn than Judith remembered. A toddler played quietly at her feet, building towers with colorful blocks. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass, and Judith saw something in Elena's expression that she had never seen before: regret, perhaps, or recognition of the price of her actions. Judith felt a complicated mix of emotions. Part of her wanted to feel satisfaction, to revel in the sight of her former tormentor brought low. But mostly, she felt sadness for the woman who had been so consumed by envy that she had destroyed herself in the process of trying to destroy others. She shifted Sophia to her other hip and continued toward the elevator. The past was the past, and she had a future to build. In the end, Judith's story wasn't really about revenge at all. It was about the corrosive power of envy, the way it poisons everything it touches, and the ultimate truth that what we put into the world has a way of coming back to us. Elena had set out to destroy Judith because she couldn't bear to see another woman succeed where she felt she had failed. But in doing so, she had planted the seeds of her own destruction. The same qualities that had made her effective at tearing others down, the manipulation, the calculation, the willingness to sacrifice others for personal gain, had made her vulnerable to someone who possessed those same qualities in even greater measure. Viktor Petrov, if that had even been his real name, had played Elena like a master musician playing a fine instrument. He had given her exactly what she thought she wanted: passion, attention, the promise of having it all, and then vanished, leaving her to face the consequences alone. The divine justice that had befallen Elena wasn't the result of some cosmic intervention. It was simply the natural consequence of a life built on tearing others down instead of building oneself up. She had spent so much energy destroying others that she had forgotten to protect herself. Judith, meanwhile, had emerged from her ordeal stronger and more focused than ever. The experience had been traumatic, but it had also taught her valuable lessons about resilience, about the importance of surrounding herself with people who truly cared about her success, and about the difference between confidence and arrogance. She never wished ill on Elena, never celebrated her downfall. If anything, she felt a kind of sad recognition of how the older woman's insecurities had consumed her, turning her into someone who could only feel successful by making others fail. As Judith rode the elevator to her new office, Sophia bobbling happily in her arms, she reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. The career she had lost had been rebuilt into something better. The confidence that had been shattered had been reformed into something stronger. The happiness that had been threatened had been deepened by the knowledge of how precious it truly was. Sometimes, she thought, the best revenge is simply living well. And as she walked into her new office, ready to tackle the challenges of the day, she knew that she was finally, truly living well. The price of envy, she had learned, was always higher than the cost of celebrating others' success. And in the end, that was a lesson worth learning, even if it had come at such a terrible price.
Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment for more stories.